We're going to call the meeting to order. We have Dean Brashani on via phone and also Sandy Hoff. Okay. All right. We have the minutes of the February 22nd meeting. Did everyone have a chance to review those? And if so, do I have a motion for approval?
I so move.
Brashani moves to approve.
All right. Well, can we take you as a second, Dr. Brashani?
I'd be thrilled.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Same
Aye.
sign. Okay. Motion carries. Before us, we have an application from 501 Main Avenue Development Corporation, LLC. And I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Good morning. This is Megan Elshag with the Fargo Planning Department. Good morning, Chairperson and Renaissance Zone Authority. The application here is for a commercial project. There is a typo up on your screen. Property is located at 501 Main Avenue. You'll kind of see the west portion of the property is what we're talking about. This is an application for a commercial project, a 4-story building, about 22,000 square feet of commercial/office space here. The project proposes an investment of $8.8 million, which exceeds the minimum investment threshold and equates to about $395 per square foot. The Renaissance Zone Plan notes this area as commercial or mixed-use development. This is Block 57. Staff believes that this project will benefit the downtown community and positively contribute. The application scored an 83 on the 100-point scale. This project, or this location, actually might look a little familiar to you. A couple of years ago, we received an application at this property, or Project 322F, for this project of a mixed-use 6-story structure. Today, we're talking about a different project, different application, and bringing that forward to you for your review. I'm just going to flip through some pictures. These are provided by the applicant of what the site looks like today. Some more images just showing different perspectives into what the site is. This is at the intersection of Broadway and Main Avenue in the northeast section there. Up on your screen is a site plan that shows how the structure would lay out. The applicant has noted that there's a potential for a future project on the east side of the building, but today we're just talking over here on the west side. And on the screen are just some perspective images. And one quick note that currently this is a city-owned property which has 0 taxes, and if this project is approved and receives the RZ abatements at the end of those tax abatements, this property, using today's numbers, would pay about $132,000 in taxes, just for reference for the Renaissance Zone Authority. On your screen is some elevations. This is showing you perspective looking north from Main Avenue, and from the north side looking south towards Main Avenue. One of the things with this application, there's the potential that there right now is proposed to have 2 tenants in the building, one on the 1st and 2nd floors, and then another on 3rd and 4th floors. And at this time, we don't believe that the tenant or entity that's going to be on the first 2 floors will take the RZ abatement, but the overall site and the 3rd and 4th floors would be looking for that abatement, and the applicant can talk a little bit more about that. We have Matt Torgerson and Chris Prue with JLG here who will want to address the commission and provide some more information. So with that, that concludes staff's presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Megan. All right.
Just bear with me a second here.
Okay,
Madam Chair, may I ask a question?
you may.
If you don't mind, can you talk a little bit, so the score on, especially the Renaissance Zone plans, it didn't get quite as high a score as other ones. Would you say it's partly because it isn't renovating an older building? Is that part of the reason? Or can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, when staff was going through this application, the bigger things that popped out was the nature of a commercial only building where you don't have that residential component, and so your board has seen other applications where, for example, River House just north, as just an all residential building, scored much lower. I think that one scored about a 60 on a 90-point scale. So I think it's partly due to that. And then the other is the view of parking. That's been noted. Staff has noted that in other applications, such as further east on Main Avenue and location of building and maybe how parking is viewed or how parking is addressed. In this application, there's no underground parking, and some of that could be just based on size of the building, but those are kind of primarily the bigger reasons that stood out.
Thank you.
I had the same question too. I think, how about category number 3? That also scored less points.
Sure. The high priority land uses. We don't entirely know. It's really hard when you look up from the state's perspective what is primary sector and how that brings. So I do and I can share this information. Actually, I think I have it in my files. But primary sector, how the state defines that, and I don't want to say it incorrectly, but so. There are, the definition, just putting it simply in how I read it, is that if it's an industry that's bringing like new wealth, and then they have a separate definition for what new wealth is. And so, part of that is based on that. We don't know entirely how that fits in or how the state would see that, but also, again, the fact that mixed use isn't a component, which is kind of a item C within that third item.
Madam Chair, if I could ask a couple questions too.
Go ahead.
Okay. So can you remind me, this this project now has a value of 8.2, is that right? What was
8.8, yep.
Or 8.8. What was the original plan, the value of that one?
Sure, that I believe, and maybe Matt would be able to answer that, but
Okay.
I think that was 22 million or somewhere in there.
Okay. And this might be a question not necessarily appropriate for the Renaissance Zone decision, but the sales agreement, this was a city-owned lot. Maybe we could just review for the group that process and the fact that this project probably was chosen. The parking lot, blank parking lot is bothering me in regards to the Renaissance Zone plan, the downtown plan, all of that. So can you just back up a little bit and remind us that decision-making process as well?
The city had gone out for an RFP on this proposed site. I think we received 4 proposals. One was just for a parking lot, 2 were for other developments, but neither of them had that much commercial space on the main floor. The minimum criteria of that RFP was that it be at least 4 floors and have commercial space on the main floor. And so when we approved the development agreement, that is in the development agreement, and this still meets that minimum. Now, their proposal, when they submitted it, was for actually 6 stories with housing on the upper floors in addition to the commercial space. And as Megan noted, it was a larger building. So, this still meets the criteria of the RFP and the development, at that base level, but it's not as big as we had hoped. One of the developments that happened after this, we accepted their proposal, was that everyone was counting on a lot of parking being available at the Island Park ramp across the street. However, the city then sold that, and so that kind of threw a surprise into their business plan, because no longer did they have, parking across the street. We did work out a deal with Bell Bank that they can rent, I think, 100 spots for up to 15 years, but it's at a higher cost than the city was charging. So, this project is sort of evolved. That's where we are today. It meets the minimum requirements of the development agreement, but it's not as good as that initial proposal. So whether or not, it's really up to you to decide, do we proceed with this or do we, somehow start over?
Right. Anything else from the authority? All right, I believe we're ready for you. Did you have a presentation?
Yeah, I can just walk through some things just to address a couple questions. So important to maybe recognize that the values we're showing for the project in the application right now are only for a portion of the building. So the full value of this project is considerably higher than the 8.8. I guess in dialogue with Megan and Ricky out in Bismarck, we were given guidance to just show the values for the piece we're applying for this morning. So recognize that the total project is worth more than that. And then, yeah, I'll maybe transition off Jim into talking just really high level about the journey we've been on. We've been at this a while. Really appreciate all the support and collaboration from the city staff, Jim in particular, the engineering team, Megan's team. This is the second application, almost third. There's another one that we worked on together that you haven't seen. So it's been a journey, and have appreciated the support and collaboration from the city staff on getting us to where we are today, and we're really excited about this. We've got 2 tenants that are locked up, so there was a question, I think, yesterday when we met with the department heads about, do you have occupancy here? And yes, we do. We've got 2 tenants committed. So I'll just walk through some stuff, I'll stop after every slide if there's questions, and really want to have an open conversation about this morning. So highlighting a couple things here on this first slide, you can see a site plan that shows a phase 1 development. That's the blue on the left. 4-story building, as Jim and Megan mentioned. Brick clad building. One of the other criteria of the RFO that was issued that Jim referred to was that this building honor its historic context. There's a lot of rich context, both immediately adjacent with the Lake Agassiz Regional Development Corp building, but also on particularly the west side of Broadway as it moves north, and on the south side of Main as it moves west. So there was a specific requirement to do that, and we think this building actually addresses that better than maybe the prior one by being a completely masonry building that's looking at that. It also provides for, in yellow, the anticipated opportunity to add a second phase to the right or to the east towards the Lake Agassiz Regional Development Corp. We are going to buy all the land we originally intended, so the black dashed line represents an acquisition from the City of Fargo, as well as an acquisition from Lake Agassiz Regional Development Corp. And then the top black box is easement that we're acquiring as well, so we can assemble a site to develop. So just to highlight some things, and Megan and Jim have already kind of covered this, but we have a sales agreement in place that Jim was working with us on, that the City Commission approved the end of December. And Jim mentioned this as well, but there is an agreement that we have between Bell Bank and ourselves that allows us access to 100 stalls in the structured parking garage to the south that I think most of you know they're improving right now. In fact, I think the crane showed up recently, and they're starting to add the top onto that as we speak. So we look forward to that, because this site is challenging from a parking standpoint, and appreciate, again, Jim's work to get us connected to the right people at Bell and strike an agreement with them so that we can get the access to the parking that I think any project on this site would require some additional off-site parking. So as it says there, we signed that deal in May of last year, and have 100 stalls and access to those for 15 years at a price point that we think is really favorable and will attract people to use them. I want to go back one too and just highlight the fact that we anticipate that the parking demand as this project would get built is probably 75 stalls. As I mentioned, it's fully tenanted as we walk into it. There'd be a tenant that for now needs to remain anonymous, but a banking tenant that's probably pretty clear to you with a drive-through. I guess it could be other things. It could be coffee, but it's not. It's a bank. So the demand there for the parking is going to be pretty high right out of the gate. So again, really appreciate the fact that we've got the crosswalk going across Main to get to that structured parking garage, and the fact that we've got that agreement in place with Bell to have access to that. And I don't know, a lot of the rest of this is just kind of detail on the project. I might just stop here because it feels like there might be more questions about this part of it, or I can spin through the rest of this if you would like. Maybe you want to tell me what your pleasure is.
We do have a question, Matt. Go
Madam
ahead.
Chair, so my question is, so we talked about the public art as being a part of that. Is that written part of the agreement? Hopefully that's still going on. And what is the share costs and things like that, if you don't mind talking about that a little bit?
No, happy to. Thanks, Dave. It's not in the agreement formally, but we feel as if it's a formal commitment we made because we included it in our response to the request for offers on the land. So as far as the development team is concerned, we expect to deliver that as part of the project. It is completely separate. It's not this project. We've had really productive conversations primarily with Nicole and Megan and Commissioner Kolpak on that. I think we see a clear way forward. I've spent time with a gallery in Berlin that would likely be the representative of the artist, who's a New York-based artist, that would be the primary sculpture piece in that park. So we continue to work on that in the background, anticipating this will happen, and not formally on paper committed, Dave, but I would say as far as we're concerned, we're committed to making that happen as part of the project.
Thank you.
There are no, did you have something? All right, Commissioner.
So you're saying the 8.8 million is not the total value? Can you, what is the total value?
It's probably closer to what, 12 or 13, Chris? Would that be a? Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Sort of from a core and shell standpoint, it's probably 12, 13 million, something like that. If we put the tenant improvements in, which you guys would, or the assessing department would, it's probably more like 16 or 17 or what.
And this has no underground parking now?
It does not, no.
So the intent for developing to the east, talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, and let me maybe just, this is maybe a little clearer. In the first phase, or in the phase we hope to execute near term, we developed, demolish most of the site, rework the parking and the site access. There are a couple things I might just highlight here, if I can, with the cursor. Part of this to get this to work well is an access agreement to get access to Broadway, one-way access. The engineering team has worked with us on that, so we're pleased that we have that in place. That is part of the agreement, and is there's a lot of entitlement work that we've had to go through, but that's in place here. The access that currently sits about here will move to the east, and this is just a backdrop to the fact that ultimately what we'd hope to develop in phase one would include that access to Broadway, would move the access point into the whole property proper a bit to the east, ironically almost back to where it was, and allow this piece to happen, and then ultimately a second phase that would consume the balance of the lot and leverage the lobby that we'd build as part of the first phase. In discussions with many, I think we feel very optimistic about a second phase happening. All of you, I think, are more aware than most of everything else happening around this, but Epic is doing a lot of stuff to the south side of Maine, to the east. Kilbourne and the Kilbourne Group and Global Development and the Fargo-Moorhead Community Theater are going to do something to the northwest. Bell Bank is putting 110 to 120 million into the project across the street. The park's getting a new pool. I feel like the south end of Broadway is about to have a really major transformation and have a lot of energy. So I like our chances on this on the property being quite interesting, to other potential tenancy. So I'm bullish about the opportunity to get the second phase happening sooner than later, because I think if you were to form a perception of South Broadway right now, it's pretty different than what it's going to be 12 to 18 months from now. There's going to be a lot of action down there and a lot of people and a lot more vitality. Does that answer the question? I'm sorry.
It does, but can I
Okay.
do a follow-up?
Continue.
So what would solve the parking problem at that point?
Well, it's the parking agreement. Like I said, without that, without the 100 stalls and the access to same, I don't, we couldn't develop this lot at this density. So without that parking agreement, it would be difficult. With a parking agreement, we're really confident that we've got enough parking.
So your parking agreement is locked in for decades or
It's a 15-year agreement.
15? Okay.
Yeah. And we feel, you guys all know this, but we feel like the context for parking will likely change a bit over the next while. Certainly another structured parking garage is proposed as part of the development to the northwest, and feel like there will be a parking solution in perpetuity, but have a 15-year agreement with Bell at this point that guarantees access to up to 100 stalls.
Commissioner Press, I just wanted to note one other thing with the parking agreement we have with Bell Bank. It requires them to have access to the public nights and weekends in that parking ramp for that 15-year term. So often residential, they're really looking for parking in the evening, not necessarily during the day.
So it's a good fit that way. I think we can swing the demand, So I'll maybe just keep
Continue
going.
on,
Deb?
please.
Okay, yeah. So these are just extremely exciting drawings that just kind of give you a sense of what the various floors are. Thanks, Dave. And then in terms of, there are many different building types that have happened as the Renaissance zone and others have developed a lot of stuff downtown, and it's been really wonderful to see the transformation. We're working really hard in this project to be pretty generous about floor to ceiling heights, the materiality. I would say the price point of constructing this building is going to be a bit higher than maybe some others that you've seen, and we take the commitment to the conditions of the RFO and the location of this as really kind of it's in part a new entry, if you will, to downtown Fargo on a site that hasn't had anything on it since, best we can figure out, since the 50s. And that was a grain elevator or some grain exchange building, I think, through our entitlement research. So completely transparent base, and I'll show you some other images here maybe. And 3 stories of brick above it, completely masonry clad. One of the fun things of this project is there really is no back. There's almost 4 fronts. Kind of odd that way. An east elevation here, so as you would come from Moorhead, that's sort of the view you'd get in that lobby that could support a second phase at the lower level. And the west end, some idea of what could happen with that park sitting in front of a west elevation that's intended to have kind of an interesting texture applied to it, different use of brick in a vertical use or a soldier course. That's a bit of a nod to the texture of the roof of the Cass Gilbert Design Depot that's just to the west. And then finally the north elevation. Again, no real back to this building. You guys all know our community well. As you proceed south down Broadway, the way the geometry works, you really get a pretty clean shot of this elevation. So you really can't, at least for us, we didn't feel like we could punt on what that elevation was. They had to treat that on the same terms as the rest of the elevation, since it's really a 4-sided building. And then these are just some perspectives. This one looking to the northwest, as if you were generally coming from the Minnesota side. Looking to the southeast, the Bell Bank Tower obviously in the background. It's kind of incredible to see that transformation. Holy smokes, right? That's quite a project. And then finally, this is kind of what the view might be looking to the northeast or from the intersection of Main and Broadway. That's really the end of what I have, Deb, but I'm happy to take other questions.
I was glancing through this last night, and what caught my eye, having been part of the Fargo downtown plan, on one of our page 6, and here it talks about capturing water from the site. Is that something that you really are going to look into?
Yeah, we intend to.
Fargo's flood plan downtown is, it floods.
Yeah. And we talked with the department heads yesterday a bit about that. There's not a code requirement that we do anything other than get it into the storm sewer. However, we would hope to harvest that and use it as irrigation water.
Okay.
And we will look at that for certain. Code requires that it's a small enough site, less than an acre, that we can tie to the storm sewer, and there's ample storm sewer access nearby, but we're gonna build a park, hopefully, as well, so maybe there's an opportunity to harvest some of that water and use it as irrigation water.
Okay,
We are out of the floodplain, by the way, too, so.
yes. Well,
Always a-
part of the plan had been talking about green space on the roof.
Yeah.
The environmental portion of it.
Yeah,
And so something like that really would tie in nicely.
yeah.
One more, it's not really a question, but I
Go
just
ahead,
wanted to
Dave.
point out, so the total, if we approve this Renaissance zone, the property tax benefit is 342,000. And you stated that it's about 132,000 a year that they'll pay. So to me, I'm not that good at math, but it's a 3-year payback once it's completed. And so to me, that's a pretty good, and then as you're all aware, that property tax, that will continue in perpetuity. And so that helps the county, that helps the park district, the school district, and the city with the additional taxes. Because right now, we receive basically zero property taxes. And so, and not that's the only reason that we do these projects, but to me, that's a pretty good investment from the Renaissance zone perspective. Thank you.
Dave, could I add to that just quickly too? Megan mentioned that we've got a great deal of clarity from the first 2-floor tenant that they expect to pay property tax right away. So you all will see a tax stream from the first and second floor tenant immediately. They're not going to participate in the rent zone, so.
Okay. Go ahead, Chad.
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair. I can't find it, but there was something in this proposal, that I was reading through it, regarding you're going to hold until you break ground, until you have occupants, and it sounds like you've got occupants, so you'll break ground this spring, this summer, this fall?
We're looking at breaking ground by the end of July, so the agreement we have in place with the city right now obligates us to start by July 31 of this year, close on the land by the end of June. We're standing here in April, so you can appreciate, we've got to get to getting here, but we're happy to work towards those dates and anticipate starting construction this summer.
Wonderful, and I think that I actually like this project better than the one that was proposed prior. I realize the concerns regarding parking, but one of the concerns I had on the prior proposal was the lack of parking and the full need for your friends across the street to support you. So this being somewhat self-sustaining to begin with, I think is a good thing. And then long term, I guess I'm not as optimistic as you, seeing the resolution regarding the parking ramp being built behind the old Broadway. I think that's going to be, if it proceeds, which I presume it will be occupied by the people around there. So I think you still will have a parking problem someday, but I think this site is vastly superior. I realize they want density, we want density, but I think this is a vastly superior solution to the one prior.
We actually like this project better as well.
Okay. Madam Chair? Got any questions? Dave, anything?
I do.
Go ahead.
I appreciate the difficulty, I'm sure, in regards to COVID and all of the changes that had to be made as a result of that. And I understand fully that we are going to have to address the parking situation from a public perspective with a ramp of some sort somewhere. And understanding the timing of that isn't great for this particular project, but beyond your willingness to say that your intent is to develop that eastern half, is there any other kind of commitment that we can hear that indeed that will happen, and maybe even a time frame with it?
Yeah, I guess I don't really want to reiterate what I've already said, but I briefly will. Given all the energy coming to South Broadway, I feel like there'll be a lot more development pressure on the rest of this parcel. Can I tell you that I've got 2 tenants in my pocket that are ready to go? No, I can't tell you that. Do I feel good about folks being interested? Yeah, I do, because there's all of a sudden there's people coming out of the woodwork asking me about whether there's room in this building, and I've had to say mostly no to that. There is a limitation to how tall this building can be without having to go to a different structural system, which adds a ton of cost and really is cost prohibitive to do. So, not naming names, not making a firm commitment. Again, I feel like a number of people have reached to me about the potential of being in this building all of a sudden. So you know, I'm optimistic by nature, I guess. I wouldn't be doing what I do if I wasn't. But I honestly wouldn't be surprised as this thing goes into construction, everything happens that I described earlier, and people look through a different lens on South Broadway and Main Avenue if there isn't quite a bit of interest in that second phase building.
Thank you, that's good to hear. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, we have a lot of information before us, some good discussion. Is the committee ready to make any motion or move forward?
Madam Chair, I would move the recommended motion, and I can't remember where it is, but can you put it back up here?
If we could get the recommended motion up, please.
All right. So we have a motion before us. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Prakash. And then any other discussion? If none, roll call vote, please.
Pipcorn?
Aye.
Madell?
Aye.
Matthew?
Aye.
Peterson?
Yes.
Preston?
Yeah.
Brashani?
Yes.
Matter?
Yes. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much for the presentation and all the work that went into this. Next on the agenda, we have an update on the Senate Bill 2391.
Yes, Senate Bill 2391. You have a laydown item, which is the Senate bill that has been approved by both the House and the Senate relating to the Renaissance Zone. So next up will be with the governor. There's really no big changes from when staff sent out the information to you previously about 6 weeks or so ago. What it would do is allow exemptions for up to 8 years. Right now, it's currently 5. It would change the definition of a rehab project and would require that anything above 5 years would have to be an improvement of 75% of the true and full value, as opposed to what it is, 50%. Renaissance Zone development plans may qualify for up to a 10-year agreement or extension. Currently, today, it is 5 years. There may be 2 satellite districts instead of 1. A property may qualify again as a Renaissance Zone project 30 years from completion of the first project. So anywhere in the state, that would still be at least another 5 years out before any project would be eligible again. And then no additional Renaissance Zone Fund credits would be approved. So we are working closely with the state on what, if approved, these changes might mean. Our development plan we'll be working on next year. We've talked about that a little bit. From what I understand from the state, too, if these changes are approved, we would have to amend our development plan to include these. So they would be effective August 1st. With the current timeline, it sounds like, so there'll be more to come for the Renaissance Zone Authority as we get closer and we learn more from our contacts at the state and what that means.
Okay. Megan, what was the feeling of our group on the changes? And had the request been made for the change from 5 to 8 years?
Sure. What originally was included, so kind of going way back, staff at the state reached out to all the communities to get feedback from kind of the administrators of the program and thoughts on the program. And so the changes that you see here, almost nearly all of them are as a result of that. Originally, what was drafted in the bill was 7.5 years. And that makes things really difficult when you're trying to do a half year for those. So that changed to 8 years. So that was one of the things that locally here, we request that change to go from 7.5 to 8, just for the kind of the logistics of it.
Sure.
But otherwise, for the most part, staff is supportive. The 75% of the current true value is one thing that may be challenging depending on the scope of what a project is. So we'll have to see how that plays out if we're to adopt here locally in the development plan, that as well. So.
Okay. Go ahead, Chad.
Madam Chair, thank you. I would have liked to see another satellite district or two. I think the city and the region could have utilized that, our friends over in West Fargo as well, but how often, and maybe this is a question for Mr. Gilmore, how often are we approached, or team, how often are we approached by other developers outside the Renaissance Zone, or I guess, yeah, just outside the Renaissance Zone for something like this?
I mean, I think there's been some interest like down in that Bruhala area, certainly in West Main and South University. I mean, we've had inquiries like out in new areas too. I don't know that we really want to go there, but there are those inquiries. And, you know, before the session, we initially floated the idea, could we have, 3 or 4 of these?
Yep.
And the sponsor said, we were only willing to let you have 1 more. And so that's where it ended up.
Okay, well, I think we can keep our options open for 2 years from now. If we can show success, our friends in Bismarck tend to be more receptive to things, so I think that might be wise.
Arlette, you had something?
So since this is in front of us here this morning, how would the project that we just looked at, if they developed the second half of it, would it qualify?
I guess I can't speak speculatively on how that would all work. There's a lot of things I think to get there. I don't, if, this is approved and locally we amend our plan here to include that, I think they would be eligible on up to 8 years. I know that rehab definition, if that's what you're asking about, Commissioner Preston, but we'd want to probably look at that closer, and there's probably some logistics we have to work out on kind of that second project or that second phase and how that would all work out too.
So just a clarifying question, so are these projects approved based on the land or on the building? In other words, if you add a portion of a building on the same property that's owned by the original developer, is it based on the actual building that's getting built, or is it based on the land underneath it?
So that's one of the things that we talked about with the applicant here on what that might mean for a project in the future,
Yeah.
based on those criterias. And so at this point, again, we'd have to work through the details of that if there was a future project, but that's something that we were cognizant of and talked with Matt about, is trying to separate kind of in totality or as much as we could and leave like that east part untouched, and just really stick to the west side. So we're finding that more and more we are getting uniqueness in projects, and we're getting a lot of ownership and commercial condos purchased. So for example, the 600 NP, that project has a little bit uniqueness that you last reviewed in February. And so what I'm learning from the state is that we are, kind of leading in the Renaissance Zone area, and we're seeing things that they anticipate other communities to probably experience in the next 5 to 10 years. And so the state has been super helpful in that regard. I've got a lot of questions for them pretty frequently, but they also are really interested in working with us and sitting down with us when we redo the go back to the development plan and how to address that and make things clear and simple, because other communities look to Fargo as well. So,
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, so a couple of things, talking about the satellite. So right now, we have one at the Oak Grove area, and so we talked about this yesterday, economic development. So that eventually can be closed out once that block is completed, and so then that would return, and so that would give us another one that we can move. And maybe you can talk about the timeline, but basically when you close it out, the project has to be completed. It's not like the Renaissance Zone has to be paid, or, you know what I mean? Once the project is done, then you can move it to someplace else. So I think that gives us more flexibility. So that's a good thing. The other thing, if you could talk about, so now, it used to be once you used the Renaissance Zone on a parcel, that was it forever. You could only use it one time, and they've also changed that rule. So now there's a clock on that. So if you don't mind talking about that, that'd be good. Thank you.
yep, that's right. Thank you for that. So one project ever was how this project, or how the Renaissance Zone was originally set up. And so with this change, it would allow another project in the future, but it really is dependent on that 30-year time frame. And so, for example, with these changes, if they're approved and this project goes through, until the project is fully approved, plus 30 years is when 501 Main Avenue, for example, would be eligible for another project. And so it sets at least that time frame as well. So it's not that a property can just make some improvements that meet the thresholds and then kind of continually at a regular situation or interval to be taking those abatements. It does have that 30-year timeframe.
Can I just make one more editorial comment, Madam Chair? The key thing we talked about, there's some new areas that would be interested in this. I have a big problem with that because to me, the Renaissance Zone, the concept is to revitalize our existing buildings. That was the original intent. And so I think, and that's, I think, a discussion for our group for later on, but I think that's very important that we don't start there, people love to get things and have us be flexible, but I think we need to be very careful to stay true to our original intent. And the very name of us alone, Renaissance, that's revitalizing what was already there. So I just think we have to be very careful because this has been very successful. Our predecessors that were on here did a very good job of being very well disciplined, and I think we need to continue that. That is the end of my sermon for today, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that. All right, any other questions or comments of Megan and Jim? All right, thank you for the update on that. I was following it a bit. Okay. Other business. Commissioner Pepcorn, you
Yeah,
had
so
one.
Madam Chair, and I apologize for monopolizing the microphone, but so tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and Jim, if you were the one that organized it, and so we're going to have a tour of the Bruhala, which was part of we were involved in that, and so if anyone, and I know everyone has a busy schedule, but if anyone, can you talk a little bit about that, Jim? And anyone here is welcome, and I would encourage you. I've been there; it's fantastic, and so it's a great addition to Fargo. It's very unique, and so. If you want to come see it, come and join the tour. Jim?
Yeah, that'll be at 1 o'clock tomorrow, and we're going to be having to notice this as a kind of a meeting, if you will, because majority of the Economic Development Committee is there, so certainly you're also able to attend. If you've been out to see it, you've kind of seen that market, but we're going to be able to get in and see what some of the hotel rooms are going to look like, and also that meeting space. And I don't think that's open yet, but in some ways, this is going to be a mini convention center for the community.
Okay. Good. Sounds fun. I hope to be there. Any other business to come before the committee? If none, meeting adjourned, and our next meeting is scheduled for May 24th. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.